I will invite Janai Leonce and Dr. Mahalia Jackman for the third paper, Gender Income Inequality in St. Lucia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Allow me to just share my screen. Hi, good morning, everyone on the panel and to those listening online. Can everyone see my screen well?
It's okay.
All right, brilliant. Thank you. So the paper I'm going to be discussing is called Gender Income Inequality in St. Lucia. Just by way of outline, I'm going to introduce the audience in the panel to St. Lucia. I would spell out what my research question and motivation was, and what are the data that we use and the findings from the analysis. To those of you who don't know, St. Lucia is a small open economy in the Caribbean. The population is less than 200,000, so really a micro state. It's dominated by the tourism and wholesale and retail industries. But what's unique and about St. Lucia and countries like ours, it has quite high levels of unemployment, almost 20% at the end of 2021. And the labor participation rates hover around 70% thereabout. What is interesting as well is that when you look at the average earnings of people in the society by age, and then you break that down by gender as well, you are seeing that female earnings relative to those of males are actually much lower. So whereas the average earnings, let's say for a 40-year-old male, is in the region of 3,000 EC dollars a month, which is just under $1,000 US, the equivalent for a female is almost $500 less than that. Now you're also seeing that the chart is color coded. Your green areas are representing persons who don't have tertiary and secondary education, and your orange and yellow areas show persons that have higher levels of educational attainment. So when you look at the females anecdotally, female wages appear lower. We also notice that the female rate of unemployment has been significantly higher than that of males. This is showing unemployment over the last 10 years for males and females. And if you look at the red line, which is the higher one, the rate of female unemployment has always been higher than that of male. There is not one quarter where it has been lower. And that struck us as interesting. And we wanted to delve a bit deeper into that as well. Even when you look at the area of poverty, you see that the female headcount for poverty between 2006 and 2016, when we last did our poverty survey, has remained the same at 30.2, 30.4 thereabout. Whereas when we look at male poverty headcount, that has declined from 28 to 21. So we were looking at the data and we realized that, listen, females earn less, females have a higher rate of poverty, and they also have a higher rate of unemployment as well. We also, in keeping with the literature, when we're just looking at the data, whereas the male participation rate in the labor force is in the region of 76, 75% thereabout, that of females has relatively remained the same at 66%. So females are less likely to participate in the labor force, less likely to be employed, more likely to be poor, and more likely to earn less income when we look at the data anecdotally. But interestingly enough, the ILO in a 2015 paper highlighted St. Lucia as the top third country in the world where your manager at your place of employment was likely to be a female. That seemed very interesting to us, given all what I have mentioned in the previous slides. So once I heard that, I knew that there was an area of research for us. So the research question was, is there a gender wage gap in St. Lucia? And if there is one, when we control for the endowment of male and female workers, does that gap persist or does that gap dissipate? And also, is it that when we find a gender gap, is that gap due to discrimination or is that gap due to other factors? So when you look at the data for St. Lucia, all of the data suggests that females are in a worse position than that of males when it comes to the labor market. But yet still the ILO in the report puts St. Lucia as number 3 in the world where your manager at your place of employment could be a woman. And we found that very interesting. So we said, let's dive a bit deeper into this. What we did, given the research question that I just showed, we did what is called the Blinder-Oskar decomposition. And that is a decomposition that essentially takes the wages of 2 groups of workers. In our case, it's male versus female workers, and tries to break down that, that difference and to see whether that difference can be explained by differences between the 2 cohorts. So is it that that difference is due to different levels of education? Is it that that difference is due to different industries where males and females work, and so forth? What that methodology also allows, it breaks down the difference into an explained and a residual. If your residual is significant, it tells you that, listen, this is not necessarily due to differences in endowments between the 2. And more often than not, that residual, where it is significant, that is ascribed to discrimination. So that's really the research question and the methodology. Now we know that females choose to participate in the labor force at lower levels than males because of traditional gender roles where females have often been the caregivers for young children and for the elderly persons in the society as well. So we also estimated the gender gap, correcting for that sample selection issue. So in the slides to follow, we would take a look at what our results were. Our model is a Blinder-Oskar decomposition, as I mentioned. Our dependent variable are the log hourly wages. So we are trying to explain male and female wages. And our independent variables are age, educational attainment, and you'll see in educational attainment is a categorical variable. So we have no education, primary school education, secondary school education, and so forth. So we have 7 levels of education. We also have 5 levels of tenure, job characteristics, and industry. And this data is coming from a 2016 survey of living conditions that was done on the island. So it interviewed roughly 1,400 households, and it asked the households quite detailed questions. We were fortunate to get the results of that, and it is that data set that we are using to build this model here. We fine-tuned that data a bit to focus on only persons that were within the ages of 25 to 54, because that is the prime working age within our society. And we also filtered out missing observations and what have you. So we ended up with a sample size of roughly 1,300 persons, of which 46% were women. So this is our data set that we use. This is the model that we ran. And our research question is to establish whether there is a gender gap between the wages that males earn and the wages that females earn. In starting out the analysis, we looked at our dependent variable, which is the log of hourly wages. And we did a density plot of hourly wages. And as you could see from the chart, the jagged red line shows you the density plot for log female wages, while the blue line shows you the density plot for male hourly wages. And the data is in log form here. You could see that the red jagged line is to the left of the male blue line in almost every single instance. So that already begins to tell us that there is something going on. When we ran the model, we found some very interesting results, and allow me a few minutes just to go through those results. Consistent with our thinking and our a priori expectations, higher level of education is associated with higher wages, which is fine and makes sense. But we noticed that there was some interesting differences between men and women when it came to education. For men, it was only university education, and you're looking at the first column there, only university education, where you began to see a statistically significant difference in earnings. Whereas for females, you are seeing a statistically significant difference starting at upper secondary, post-secondary, and university education. Now, if you look at the university education coefficient, while they are both significant for men and women, indicating that university educated men and women have significantly higher incomes than their counterparts with lower levels of education, the coefficient is quite large for women relative to that of men. So it shows us that education is actually more important for women relative to men, particularly the higher levels of education. We also see that tenure, which is the length of time someone has been employed, scales positively with income. And for both men and women, we are seeing that in the 10-year and more, that is where you begin to see a statistically significant difference. You also note that when it comes to women, age is statistically significant, whereas there is no statistical significance of age vis-a-vis income for men. That's another telling sign as well, and we could always discuss in the during the discussion segment. In the previous slide, which looked at the first half of our results, we showed that education was significant and positively correlated with income. If you look at the educational attainment of women and you focus on the highlighted area, the circular area there, we see that women have higher levels of university education, almost double that of males, and higher levels of post-secondary education, almost 4 or 5 percentage points higher than males. Looking at the second half of our results when we ran our model, when we look at the type of industry that men and women worked and the type of job characteristic that men and women have, we found some interesting differences there as well. You are seeing that it is really in the craft and professional sectors that men get statistically more earnings, whereas for women, it is where they are managers and professionals. And we are looking at the level of significance indicated by the asterisk there. In industries, you are seeing that women in the manufacturing industry earn considerably less than their peers, and that is one of the only areas of statistical significance relative to males, where across the industries, you are not seeing much variation for males there at all in terms of statistical significance. So the industry one works does not appear to statistically influence the average incomes within our context. But again, interestingly enough, when you look at where men work and where women work, almost half of women work for the public sector or our government and the retail industry. And it scales downward significantly from there. When you look at male and where they work, you see it's evenly spread out across the industries, with the purple bar being construction.
Please, sorry, Mr. Janai.
Okay.
Try to conclude, please.
Okay, thank you. The final analysis, when we did the decomposition, we found that there was a 0.24 or 27% differential between the income of women versus men. So there was a positive gap. When we adjusted for sample selection bias due to the reasons that I indicated earlier, that gap actually doubled to as high as 50%. So our findings showed that there was a wage gap. The wage gap is as high as 27 to almost 50% when you look at the decomposition, and that gap is largely unexplained, meaning that that difference cannot be attributed to the educational differences and the other endowment differences between the two. So in conclusion, there is a gap. That gap is not due to the differences between the educational attainments or industries, which leads us to believe that that gap is driven largely by discrimination. Thank you very much, and I shall end there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Janai, for this nice presentation.
Thank you.
We will get a lot of debate, I imagine. It's very interesting topics.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.